1 week season.
1 week season, fam, La Familia. Welcome back. It is week 8. We are here in the 1 week season FanDuel Labs week 8 edition. Ready to build some lineups, ready to jam out. We're back to a 13-game slate. No teams on bye this week, so 6 more teams, 3 more games to deal with than we had on last week's main slate. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of options. Really going to have to dive into things and kind of figure out what those best game environments, those best teams to target are going to be. So with that, I'm going to waste no more time. I'm going to go ahead and bring on my esteemed colleague, Maximus. How are we doing today?
Thanks for having me, Mike. Doing good. Looking forward to this week. Definitely looks like a sensory overload on the face of it with like a week 1 boot up for how many games there is on the slate. But yeah, looking forward to digging into it with you.
Yeah, 13 games. It definitely, it kind of changes how you want to look at things. And I guess it's funny because like in our Discord, in our 1 week season Discord this week, like one of the things, and I believe it's in the Reflection channel, a big hot topic has been people just struggling with like their player pool, just like narrowing down their player pool. They're getting like it's so easy to want to play everyone or to think like, oh, this could be the guy, or what if this guy has the big week? So like that's that's always like an interesting thing. I guess I'll throw that to you before we get into like the lineups and stuff. Do you have anything as far as like the size of your player pool or how you try to pare it down, like specific things that you're looking for or things you try to keep in mind?
Yeah, on the 5-entry max, that's kind of the good news about the it's less FOMO that I deal with, because usually I can get it consolidated to kind of where I want it. But to your point, yeah, I mean, maybe that's the case for MME where you kind of eliminate more of the FOMO. Well, I'll just, expand my pool through MME. But in a small field with a 5-entry max, and of course, based on FanDuel too, usually I like to stay within the boundaries of what the strategy should be on this site as opposed to DraftKings, which again is eloquently covered in your FanDuel course. The types of quarterbacks within reason you should be looking for, especially in a field size like this where it's only 500 or 600 entrants usually. It's, I do start to feel that way about like sensory overload of different players I like, but then you always have to kind of reel yourself back into what is the overall strategy. It's touchdowns. Does every player on this team have a realistic chance in your opinion or mine, as you're going through your process of getting multiple touchdowns, on that week? And that's kind of, thankfully, or what I try to bring it back to kind of cut through the fog or the haze of the sensory overload of different options that you may like based on information you hear that particular week. Stuff gets steamed up, as we know, chalk always forms. So it's just cutting through that to the strategy of the type of contest, the type of site you're playing on, and then kind of sticking with the overall theme of, what you're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of makes sense. And like to your point, like in this kind of, I talked about this on Discord with some people, is like the MME thing. I think that's like one of the biggest mistakes people do make is when they play MME, or even if they don't like fully max like 150, even if they're like, hey, I'm going to play 20 rosters or 30 rosters, they look at those extra rosters as, like you said, like, oh, then I can play this guy too, and I can play this guy, and like their player pool just like expands so exponentially that it doesn't actually increase their chances of winning that much. It just kind of guarantees they're going to have X number of losing rosters. Whereas really when you expand and you play more, like, yes, you're going to have more players total that entered into your rosters, but that doesn't mean that you want to have like 80 different guys on your rosters playing 100 rosters and, I have this guy on 2 rosters and this guy on 3. I think that's like the biggest mistake, because it's like in the NFL, like the saying, they'll say about NFL teams, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have any. Like, when there's those quarterback controversies, like, because then it's kind of the same thing in DFS. Like, if you're playing everyone, you're not really playing anyone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're basically spinning a roulette wheel. Sure, any of those rosters could line up just perfectly, but you're just setting yourself up to, like, DFS is hard enough as it is. I think that like keeping a tighter player pool and finding, like, if you keep a tighter player pool and even when you have more rosters, there's a greater chance that you're going to actually have one that lines up where everybody has a good game. Now, it might not be lines up to the point, like to a perfect point, or you might miss out on the had to have it guy that week. But you're more likely to, let's say you play 4 quarterbacks and you play 6 running backs instead of playing 8 quarterbacks and 12 running backs. Well, the odds are that 1 or 2 of those quarterbacks are going to have a pretty good game. And even if only 2 or 3 of the 6 running backs, even if you're just 50%, even if only 2 or 3 hit, you're more likely to have those 2 or 3 together on a roster, as opposed to if you have 12 running backs, then you got maybe 5 or 6 guys that dud. And it's just more likely you're going to find landmines, So it was just an interesting thing I wanted to bring up, because in the Discord this week, it's something that like people like bring up, but then also as you go through the week, everybody wants to play everyone. Like, you start telling yourself stories of why this guy could hit, why that guy could hit. It's just, it's an interesting tug of war that we're always battling here in the DFS streets. With that said, I'm going to bring up your FanDuel lineup. Again, for those, if anyone is new, or for those returning viewers, this is a lineup Maximus has built. Obviously, we're recording this on Thursday, so a lot could change. But this is for the 30K Sunday touchdown. It's a 5-entry max tournament on FanDuel. $30,000 prize pool, $4,000 to first. Each entry costs $65. But again, it's a maximum of 5 entries. So you can max it out if you want with 5 entries and not be at a huge disadvantage, or feel like you're at a huge disadvantage to the people who play, 80, 100, 150 rosters in some of the other contests. So very cool structure, smaller field, 524 people. It's winnable. And it is, you get a much greater chance to finish with a high, in the top 10 and give yourself a chance to actually win it than some of these giant contests. So with that said, Maximus, take us through your roster for this week.
Yeah, also a quick note, 25% of the field kind of makes the money line on this tournament every week. My quick results from last week. So I had a down week overall. I had a losing week, but I kept my streak alive with at least one of my 5 teams placing in this particular tournament. So that's 7 weeks in a row. I've had 3 weeks of 3 out of 5 placing, 2 weeks of 2 out of 5, and then 2 weeks of 1 out of 5. And then 1 week I didn't play it, which I wish I would have played it that week because I was in a lesser tournament, as we had talked about. But so yeah, this is digging in so far. Again, for people, this is based on FanDuel pricing, FanDuel strategy. One thing I almost would like to do is, it's because I'm, it's always the anchor is that FanDuel course that Mike Johnson has on 1 week season. Whenever you're in doubt, or wherever you're getting almost too much information sometimes. Getting back to the first part of the show here too, it's like I'm in my car. I got Sirius XM. I'm listening to a lot of, the fantasy sports radio while I'm driving. And then obviously I have the resources of 1 week season and other outlets. And, it's a blessing and a curse sometimes, because people steam up areas that are more times than not directed toward DraftKings strategy and thought process, and not necessarily FanDuel. So I have to keep that in context, that what we're building for, what this contest is, and what the pricing and the strategy is. And again, guys, it's all encompassed in that FanDuel course here on 1 week season that Mike has. So go ahead.
I want to hop in quick. So, because what you just said there was interesting, like how you're, when you're like driving and you're listening on Sirius, and like you're just like, if you're playing DFS seriously at NFL, like it's fun. Like we all love fantasy football. We love DFS. Like realistically, like it's a long week. Like, there's all this time. And so like, you want to consume content because like you enjoy it. You enjoy the thing. So obviously now I work for 1 week season. I write the NFL Edge games. So I'm kind of in it all week. But it's funny you say that, because before I was in this role, so I used to be a teacher, and it was the strangest thing. What I found was a lot of my most successful weeks, or at least the weeks where like I felt like at the end I like built the best, or was like, were the weeks where I was like super busy at work. The weeks where like all week, like I had meetings and then I had parent teacher conferences and whatever. And where like, I actually didn't have that much time throughout the week to like take in like all this like excess noise. Now the caveat was with that was it was weeks where I was very busy during the week, but then like Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, like things like calmed down. So I was able to like just kind of lock in. The weeks where I was busy all week and then the weekend was crazy, those didn't go well. But it's just kind of interesting, and I'm guessing like people who are watching or who, obviously aren't in like, this isn't like their job. It's just something you got to be careful of, I think. It's something I kind of figured out where I had to like, once I became aware of that, I was able to like consciously like be like, no, I'm just going to listen to the radio, or, I'm going to read a book instead of like looking up this, like, reading this 2,000 word article on Tuesday night, like, because it's just like filling my brain with like extra things. So just wanted to jump in there because like you were talking about the listening to the radio thing, and it just like clicked in my mind, something that I used to do that made it more difficult for me when you would think like, oh, more information better, but sometimes it can be too much. So
absolutely, it can be too much, especially if you lose sight of the focus of what you're actually playing.
Right.
Like, I'll give one quick example and then we'll go to the team. Like, for some reason, the Saints Colts is being really steamed up on the shows I've been listening to on Sirius XM this week. Obviously, the Colts have kind of been exploding the last few weeks. But if you really look at that game on the face of it through the lens of what is covered in the FanDuel course that you have, it's kind of like all a negative. It's a cheap pocket passing quarterback in Minshew. Josh Downs is a slot receiver that has volume, although he is capable of breaking a big play. But, it's just all these elements that really don't really cater necessarily to what you're looking to do on FanDuel overall, from the strategy perspective. But I'm sure on DraftKings, maybe it's more attractive regarding what the pricing is over there and the way these players accumulate bonuses for 100 yards receiving or rushing or 300 yards passing. You don't get any of that on FanDuel. You don't get the bonuses that you see on DraftKings. So one of the many aspects to keep in mind where touchdowns are at so much more of a premium on FanDuel. And I have to remind myself of that, like you said, when I start listening to stuff and, remember, this doesn't necessarily apply to what we're covering here.
Well, right. Because like on DraftKings, salary is a bit tighter, so it becomes more important to find like those values. Volume is a bigger thing where just like getting catches, getting work makes a bigger difference. A guy happens to get over the 100-yard mark, he gets a bonus. Like that stuff all adds up. But like, on FanDuel, I won't go fully into why, but like touchdowns are just so much more important. And like those two teams you're talking about, like the Saints, yeah, they've got Olave, they've got Kamara. I mean, Michael Thomas, he can play. Rashid Shaheed, he's like shown he can be explosive. Taysom Hill obviously steals like vultures things. Jamal Williams is there. He could be used as like a goal line back. And then Jawan Johnson's coming back. And then you look at the Colts, and it's, again, like you said, Minshew's kind of like the pocket passing type, but they've got, two running backs splitting things. They've got Downs and Pittman. It could hit on DraftKings. And if the touchdowns are spread out on FanDuel based on how these guys are priced, it's just a thinner needle to thread.
Absolutely. They're very spread out teams.
Yeah.
The Saints were actually a good defense. And yeah, it was another interesting, and so far listening earlier in the week, it seems like that game is being steamed up by a lot of people I was listening to. But getting to our team. So I have Joe Burrow this week. Love his price point at 7,100 on FanDuel. So he got another week. They're coming off a bye. He got another week to rest up the calf. He was already starting to look, I thought, in the previous 2 weeks, started to show signs of what we come to know with Joe, where he is capable of running as well when his calf is right. And so we have a matchup here. They're playing against, again, on the face of it, very tough team, tough defense. But the 49ers have been reeling the last couple of weeks. They've been giving up points. They've been doing some uncharacteristic things. Brock Purdy now is all but out, I think, with the concussion situation. So, these have the elements of being a game between two very good coached teams with very good players on each side, that it could turn into something that could be worthwhile, in my opinion. So I have Joe Burrow stacked with Jamarrchase, kind of just a skinny. I don't have a second stacking partner on this team with Joe. I do have a run back of George Kittle for the 49ers at the tight end spot. Again, no Deebo Samuel. They've announced, I think he's going to be out for 2 games at least. One was against the Vikings.
Yeah, they have a bye next week, so I think the plan is to bring him back after the bye.
Right. So we got Burrow with Chase, and we got as a stacking partner, and a run back in this case of Kittle at 6,100. I mean, again, Kittle can definitely be used more in the passing game with Deebo out alongside Ayuk and some of the secondary receivers behind that. But love his price on FanDuel this week. Always capable of having a ceiling game in a competitive game environment. Then we have Breece Hall, who I don't really care what anybody says about this guy. I just lock, but he is just Breece Hall to me is the eye test over the past few weeks. He has definitely been flashing on the screen for me over the past few contests. And, this week he's not really on the road. New York against New York. Pretty sure there'll be an equal share of fans on both sides. You could almost jokingly say home favorite running back.
Yeah, but, I think everyone talks about home and away. I think that, maybe to a certain extent fans matter, but I think the home and away stuff, like for a player, it's probably got more to do with like sleeping in your own bed, like coming to, like being at home, like, you know what I mean? Like not having to travel, like all that stuff, I think is probably more relevant than like, this is another like conversation that came up on Discord, like just like home road splits and that sort of thing. And my example was like, I think it probably matters more for quarterbacks because they're like decision making, like they're back there having to like, that's where like nerves can come in. But for like running backs and stuff, like I don't think when a guy's in a hole and he's about to meet a 230-pound linebacker at full speed, I don't think he's, you know what I mean? I don't think where he is, what stadium he's in matters at that point. Like that's full reaction, like survival mode. So
right.
That just made me think of it, but continue.
Yeah, no worries. Breece Hall's definitely taken the reins of that field. I think Dalvin Cook's kind of an afterthought at this point. So I got Breece Hall. I got Aaron Jones. So I looked up Aaron Jones' recent games against the Vikings, albeit with Rodgers last year and the year before, and he's just averaging like 8 yards per carry, 4 to 5 targets a game. I mean, again, you got to watch his health. I know the report came out. I think he stretched out with the team, but he didn't actually practice.
Yeah.
But, monitor that, of course. And I have a little kind of switcheroo on him and the next player that kind of works pricing wise in the event that, the finality is he's going to be limited or it's a 50-50 or he doesn't play at all, obviously. But I love Aaron Jones, Green Bay at home, coming off, not such a great game last week, being utilized more if he's healthier by game time. AJ Brown needs no introduction. It's just been a monster this year. And I think the last time he played Washington, which was a couple weeks ago, I think he went for 34 FanDuel points. So, I mean, he was kind of like, who was the other receiver? Oh, Devontae Adams. He was demanding to be more involved earlier in the year, and they've definitely heeded his request, I feel, and he's, pretty much set it and don't forget and don't regret it. So I have AJ Brown there along with Jamarrchase. Then we have Rashee. I have a skinny stack of the Denver, Kansas City game with Rashee Rice and Javonte Williams. Both these players the last couple of weeks in my watching back games have been really flashing. Looks like they're kind of back, especially in Javonte's case, he's kind of back to what we expect him to be as far as his skill set. Rashee Rice seems like he's starting to emerge from the muck of the Kansas City wide receiver room as he's starting to rise up in the ranks, I think, along with Kelsey with Mahomes. And then we have the Carolina Panthers defense. Cheap defense. They're coming off a bye. They haven't won a game yet. They're going to be hungry to win one, I think. And, they fit this team as far as a cheaper defense in this case. With Aaron Jones and A.J. Brown, however, so if you were to find out, Aaron Jones continues to be downgraded for some reason as the week goes along, well, it's a very interesting price point of elite receiver and playable running back is what I call it. So if we were to put in, take A.J. Brown out, we put in Tyreek Hill, and of course he has some injury news to monitor. You could put in the running back spot Alexander Mattison, who's also in a really good spot against the Packers this week. Packers have not been good against the run this year. I keep looking up Madison and the red zone targets and rushing attempts. They're there. I mean, he's top 5 in all of these red zone categories per NFLsavant.com. That's kind of the site that I use for targets in the red zone and rushing red zone attempts. So that's one way you could do it. You could go off of Tyreek Hill. Let me see here. If you wanted to, I'll just do this quickly to give a few other examples. If you went to Cooper Kupp at wide receiver, coming off a rare dud for him, that would actually get you to Joe Mixon, which could be an interesting double stack with Burrow and Chase. And then you'd keep the rest of the team the way it is. You could even go down to, on the wide receivers, Adam Thielen at 8,200. And then that moves you up to Isaiah Pacheco. And then maybe you switch around Rashee Rice for Tank Dell or Josh Downs. That's around the same price point. So there's a lot of wiggle room with that. For some reason this week, I always kind of cover a little sliver that I kind of discover with price points on FanDuel. And I kind of like it for one of the wide receiver spots and one of the running back spots. There's a lot of switching. You can even go down to Brandon Ayuk, and that gets you up to the Kamaras and the Pollards and that kind of thing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But don't get me wrong, I love where it is as long as we maintain that Aaron Jones is progressing and not digressing in his health as we head towards Sunday.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. The one you got me thinking there with Madison at 6,100 because Cam Akers played the most he's played on Monday night. So that's slightly concerning, but you kind of alluded to it. Madison is Madison's basically the guy who's getting like the red zone work, and he's getting the like the passing game work for the most part. Akers did catch 2 passes, broke kind of a longer one, had 2 for 30 receiving the other night. But like Madison's like the guy who's going to be out there in more passing situations, third down back type of thing. And he's the guy who they're probably going to trust more near the goal line. So that's like an interesting spot, and really that uncertainty, because if Madison isn't going to be, if he is being usurped, then Akers at 5,200 is he's in a great spot, if he is going to take it over. So either way, that's one of those things where like we can all have our own opinions, but like regardless, like the Madison play, he's cheaper and people, it's a hard click for people. And I would think that, I think like current ownership projections have him around 10%, but that's for like the larger field ones. I think he's the type of guy that in these smaller field tournaments is going to be less owned, just because people search for more certainty, but he's a guy who like he realistically could, he could realistically he could score 2 touchdowns, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it wouldn't be shocking because he's the back that we would expect to be on the field in those situations. And then it's literally just does he get in, because I would think that they're going to have some opportunities there. And, I would think Hawkinson will be one of the more popular tight ends this week. I would think Addison will get a little bit of steam coming off a big Monday night performance. So, Madison kind of gives you a little bit of leverage there.
Well, also a quick info, Hawkinson has not practiced this week yet. He has a foot injury. So that may also play into Madison having some extra volume. We'll see how it ends up. They may just be resting him as a veteran.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't practice Wednesday. It was after the Monday night game. So, I mean,
maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if he misses practice Thursday, again, this goes live on Friday. So if you're watching this, it's Friday or later. We're recording on Thursday. So if you're watching this, if Hawkinson missed practice on Thursday, or Friday, that would be a pretty big red flag. But yeah, either way, Madison, just one of those spots where, and we talked about it, I think last week, I think it was either last week or 2 weeks ago, you can play guys who are going to be popular. You just can't play all guys who are going to be super popular. So that's all it really takes is, if Madison scores 2 touchdowns at 6,100 and he's likely to end up the highest scoring back in that 5,500 to 6,500 range, at relative, at single digit ownership, in a tournament like this, that could be enough. Because it's, if he's the highest scoring back in that range, and then you've got that extra salary because you paid down where a lot of people are going to want to spend up for the more sure thing running backs. It definitely becomes a point of an inflection point for the slate potentially.
I agree with you. Madison seems to come across as a blind spot to people maybe sometimes. There's kind of that term, you go through the player list and he's kind of seems to be a blind spot to people sometimes. Get ready for this statistic because your mind's going to be blown because we are halfway through the season now. So it's enough of a sample size through 8 games. Red zone targets for running backs. Alexander Madison is number 1 in the league over Christian McCaffrey. So that blows my mind as much as, we think about Christian McCaffrey with getting the touchdown every week. So Madison does have 2 receiving touchdowns, so far. So and then that gets you up to Tyreek Hill on this particular team too, the way the rest of the build was, which nothing wrong with that. So
we'll see I'm interested to see what happens with Tyreek.
Yeah.
Tua and Waddle's comments weren't very were not very promising.
Oh, what? I don't think I came across that.
Tua basically said like, yeah, I hope like whenever we're able to get Tyreek back, that'll be great or something like that. And like Waddle refused to answer like questions about him and stuff. So yeah, I don't know. He like you could see on Sunday night, you could see when he heard it, it's a hip injury. He went in the medical tent. But he kept playing and he like seemed fine. But it's one of those things where maybe wake up the next day and it's huge bruise on the side or something.
Right.
It'll be interesting too. That's always interesting to me because like I don't think you can take much for granted in the NFL, but like what do the Dolphins think as far as like they've got a week 10 bye and they play the Patriots this week, who they've beat already once. But then next week they get a huge matchup against the Chiefs. So like, do they think, oh, like we can squirt, we can find a way past the Patriots here. We can steal one without Tyreek and have him closer to full strength for the Chiefs game. And then he can just gut that one out and have a bye week. That's the sort of stuff is always interesting to me. Or like your build here, this is the, you built around the Bengals here. So like T Higgins, he had that rib injury before their bye week and he missed a week and then he came back week 6, but like they played the Seahawks. If you watch that game, like he was out there a lot, but like they clearly were like
decoy. Maybe.
Yeah, like they weren't like trying to get him the ball. And it's like, well, it's a rib injury. He probably could run around just fine, but like didn't want to get hit. So, it's with Tyreek, do they have him out there and he can run around, but they, limit his target share? That makes like Waddle super interesting to me for this week.
And to pile on to your point even more, they play the Chiefs the next week, and I believe that game's in London, so you're going to have travel as well on top of it.
Is it really? Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Man, that sucks. I was all excited for that to be on the main slate.
I know. Yeah, that's a London island.
So, can't have it all.
Yeah. But yeah, overall, the way the team was, we had Aaron Jones, AJ Brown, and then it was Kittle was the run back to the Burrow Chase stack, a skinny stack. And yeah, so I like where that team's going. I can almost assure you guys on a 5-entry max, I'll have one Mahomes, one Lamar, one Jalen Hurts, almost per the way FanDuel strategy and scoring is and dual threat quarterbacks. And what I like about Lamar and Mahomes in particular, they're easy stacking partners. It's always Andrews and Kelsey. You got Flowers, you have Rice, they're starting to come along, but you always have that foundational stacking partner without really having to overstack, and then find some opportunity in other spots.
Yeah, agreed. I think you get a good start on where you're thinking about the slate. I'm still kind of putting my thoughts together on some of the things. We're here on Thursday. So much at this point in the season, so much comes together on like Friday once you get, injury reports officially. Like some of these guys we're just guessing on still, like Hawkinson and Tyreek. Like who knows? Tyreek could just full practice tomorrow, and we're like, well, forget it. Same with Hawkinson, or they could miss both, and that changes the whole slate the other way. So yeah, you just got to have a pulse on it, and then weather, obviously, as we get more into the cold months, becomes a bigger factor. But yeah, it's good to have like that starting point that you can adjust from. And not to get, you don't want to get too stuck in concrete as far as like how you're seeing things, but it is good to have like a base to kind of ground yourself from, so that like we talked about before, you don't get that like late week information overload where you're swaying like 100 different directions, and kind of how you want to attack it. Do want to talk quickly Just remind, if you're viewing this, hit the like and subscribe button. Helps us out a lot. Feel free to comment. I know there was a couple comments last week. No questions, but yeah, if you guys have questions or things, different strategies, FanDuel stuff that you want us to talk about, feel free to leave a comment there or hit us up on Discord or Twitter. Would be happy to dive into different things on a weekly basis during that first portion of the show. So again, yeah, like and subscribe. Check us out, oneweekseason.com. NFL Edge, you can get a 1 week season free subscription. It costs you nothing. You don't need a credit card or anything. Read all the NFL Edge write-ups, get a good jump start on the week and how teams are likely to attack. And I also want to plug, I got my Drafters shirt on today. They sent this to me because I maxed their best ball contest. But yeah, I just love their product over there. Their best ball stuff is really good. They also have a very similar product to like Underdogs Battle Royale, where you draft a team for that week. It's like a five person drafts. It's really interesting too because there's some game theory aspects with it. So their contest, it's 14 games this week at least. It's all the Sunday games, so it includes Sunday night as well. But also, so when you draft your team, after the draft, you can swap players in and out of your lineup that weren't drafted. So you get up to I think it's either 10 or 15 swaps, I believe. And you can even swap after lock of the early games, you can swap guys that are playing later. So there's some, different game theory aspects, and it's not a huge, it's not 100,000 people. It's I think it's 1,000 people or something that are in it. So, you can dive into the standings there. So I've been kind of dipping my toes in there and I think I'm going to jump in a little more and then I can focus in when I have teams drafted. I can focus in on the swaps there during the last hour before lock, so I don't tinker with my DFS lineups and make those last minute decisions with the DFS lineups.
The 5 game thing, that's like a parlay.
What's that?
You were saying the 5 game, is that like a parlay kind of on the drafters? Oh no,
there's 5. So you do a draft, like a snake draft, like on Underdog, and there's 5. It's a 5-person draft.
Oh, okay.
So it's you and 4 other people. So it's like in best ball, you sign up, and then once it gets to 5 people, you guys go into a draft room, and then it snake drafts, and you draft a DFS roster.
Gotcha. Okay.
But then once that draft is done, so on Underdog, you're locked in there with what your team is, whether you drafted on Monday, Tuesday, Saturday, whenever. But on Drafters, when you have that team, then you can go back in, and so there's 8 people on your roster. There's 5 people in your draft, so there's 40 players have been drafted. So everybody that wasn't drafted is just sitting there in the pool. You can swap one of your guys out and swap somebody who wasn't drafted in.
Okay.
So there's some game theory aspects there that we won't dive all the way into today, but just an interesting product, and they have a really good best ball product. So I wanted to shout them out here today. So and if you do go play on there, use promo code OWS, and if it's your first deposit, they'll match you up to $100. So some free money there.
Sounds like a good deal.
Yeah. So with that, I am going to let you go, Maximus. We will see you next week to break down your Sunday NFL touchdown first place roster and pop the champagne as you get that monkey off your back and your Buffalo Bills streak. So we'll let you go. We'll see you next week. Good luck to everybody. We will see you in the draft streets. We will see you at the top of the leaderboards, and we will see you next week.
1 week season.